5 months ago. If someone had told me that I would be sitting in front of a camera, speaking English, and creating YouTube videos in this language, I probably wouldn't have believed them. Not because I hated English, not because I wasn't interested in learning it, but because I didn't believe I could actually do it. For many years, English was something that always stayed in the background of my life. I learned it in school. I watched videos in English. Sometimes I read articles. Sometimes I tried to memorize vocabulary. But whenever it came to speaking, I froze. I knew words. I knew grammar. But when I wanted to say a simple sentence, my mind suddenly became empty. Maybe you've experienced that feeling before. You know the answer. You understand what people are saying. But when it's your turn to speak, nothing comes out. That was exactly me. I spent years thinking that one day I would become ready. One day I would become fluent. One day I would finally start speaking. But that day never came because I was waiting for confidence. And confidence never arrives before action. It only comes after action. Looking back now, I realize something very important. My biggest problem wasn't my English. My biggest problem was fear. I was afraid of making mistakes. I was afraid of sounding stupid. I was afraid that people would judge my pronunciation. I was afraid that someone would laugh at my accent. And because of that fear, I kept delaying my progress. I kept telling myself, maybe next month, maybe after I finish this course, maybe after I memorize more vocabulary. But there was always another excuse. Then something happened. I'm a graphic designer. I've been working as a designer for many years, and during those years, I realized something. Almost everything I wanted to learn was in English. The best tutorials, the best books, the best courses, the best communities, most of them were in English. I wasn't just missing a language, I was missing opportunities. I was limiting myself. And then I started thinking about my future. I didn't want to create content only for Arabic speakers. I wanted to reach people from different countries. I wanted to share what I know with the world. I wanted to communicate without needing a translator. I wanted English to become part of my life, not just another subject I studied. So I made one simple decision. For the next 5 months, English would become part of my daily routine, not my weekly routine, not whenever I had free time, every single day. I wasn't trying to become perfect. I wasn't trying to sound like a native speaker. I just wanted to become better than I was yesterday. That small decision completely changed everything. Now, I'm creating YouTube videos in English. I'm having conversations. I understand podcasts that used to feel impossible. I enjoy reading articles without translating every sentence. And most importantly, I'm no longer afraid to speak. Am I fluent? Not yet. Do I still make mistakes? Absolutely. Probably even in this video. But here's something I've learned. Making mistakes is part of speaking English. Silence is not. If you wait until you're perfect, you'll probably never start. And if there's one thing I hope you remember from this video, it's this. You don't need to be fearless to start. You only need to be willing. Because every person who speaks English confidently today was once a beginner, just like you, and just like me. In this video, I'm going to share exactly what I did during these 5 months, the mistakes I made, the habits that helped me, the resources I used, and the mindset that completely changed the way I learn English. Nothing is sponsored. Nothing is complicated. This is simply my real story. And hopefully, it can become the beginning of yours. Chapter 2. The biggest mistake I made. Before I tell you what actually worked, I want to tell you what didn't, because I wasted a lot of time. And maybe you're making the same mistake right now. For years, I thought learning English was about collecting information. Every time I opened YouTube, I searched for videos like, Learn 1,000 English Words, Master English grammar, the fastest way to become fluent. The secret to speaking English. I watched hundreds of videos, maybe even thousands. Every video gave me a new tip, a new method, a new app, a new challenge. And every time I finished watching, I felt productive. I thought I had learned something. But then, a few hours later, I couldn't remember most of it. Have you ever experienced that? You spend an hour watching English videos. You feel motivated. You close YouTube, and then nothing changes. That was exactly my life. I wasn't practicing English. I was consuming content about learning English. Those are two completely different things. Learning about swimming doesn't teach you how to swim. Reading books about the gym doesn't build muscles. Watching cooking videos doesn't make you a chef. And watching videos about English doesn't automatically improve your English. One day, I asked myself a simple question. How many hours have I actually spent speaking English? The answer shocked me. Almost none. I had spent hundreds of hours studying, but almost 0 hours using the language. That's when I realized something. English is a skill, not information. Think about riding a bicycle. Can someone learn to ride a bike only by reading books? Of course not. At some point, you have to get on the bike. You'll probably fall. Maybe many times, but every fall teaches you something. English is exactly the same. You have to use it. You have to make mistakes. You have to sound awkward. You have to forget words, because that's how your brain learns. Before, whenever I forgot a word, I felt frustrated. I thought, my English is terrible. Now, when I forget a word, I smile, because I know something important. Forgetting is part of learning. Every mistake is evidence that I'm practicing, not evidence that I'm failing. That mindset changed everything. I also stopped chasing the perfect method. For years, I believed there was one magical course, one magical app, one magical teacher, one magical technique. But after 5 months, I discovered something much simpler. The best method is the one you actually use every day. It doesn't matter if it's YouTube, a podcast, a book, Netflix, ChatGPT, or talking to yourself. If you stay consistent, it works. If you quit after 3 days, nothing works. Consistency beats perfection, every single time. Another mistake I made was comparing myself to other people. I watched creators who spoke amazing English. Some of them sounded like native speakers, and I kept asking myself, why can't I speak like that? But I never asked. How many years have they been practicing? Maybe 10 years, maybe 15, maybe 20. And here I was, expecting 5 weeks of practice to compete with 10 years of experience. That's not realistic. So I stopped comparing. Instead, I compared myself to one person, the person I was yesterday. If today's English was just 1% better, that was enough. Because 1% every day becomes something incredible over time. Looking back, I don't think I needed more talent. I didn't need a better memory. I didn't need a more expensive course. I simply needed fewer excuses and more practice. That was the biggest lesson I learned. And honestly, everything became easier after I understood that. Chapter 3. The decision that changed everything. If I had to choose one moment that completely changed my English journey, it wasn't when I found a new app, it wasn't when I bought a course, and it definitely wasn't when I learned a difficult grammar rule. It was the day I changed my identity. Let me explain. Before, I used to say, I'm trying to learn English. There's nothing wrong with that sentence, but it made English feel like a temporary project, something I would do for a few weeks, and then stop. One day, I changed the way I talked to myself. Instead of saying, I'm trying to learn English, I started saying, I'm someone who uses English every day. It sounds like a small difference, but it completely changed my actions. Because when you change your identity, your habits start to follow. I stopped asking, should I practice today? Instead, I asked, how am I going to use English today? That one question made everything easier. Some days, I listened to a podcast while drinking coffee. Other days, I watched a YouTube video without subtitles. Sometimes, I read a short article. Sometimes, I recorded myself speaking for 5 minutes. The activity wasn't always the same, but one thing never changed. English became part of my day. Not something special, not something difficult, just another daily habit, just like brushing my teeth. At the beginning, it wasn't easy. There were days when I didn't feel motivated, days when I was tired after work, days when I wanted to watch something in Arabic because it felt more comfortable. And honestly, sometimes I almost skipped my practice. But then I remembered something. Motivation comes and goes. Habits stay. So I made a simple rule. Even if I only had 10 minutes, I would still do something in English. 10 minutes of listening, 10 minutes of reading, 10 minutes of speaking. Because I didn't want to break the habit. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. Nobody was watching me. Nobody was giving me grades. This journey was only between me and my future self. One thing that helped me a lot was removing pressure. In the past, I thought every study session had to be perfect. I needed a notebook, a quiet room, a full hour, the right mood. Now, sometimes I practiced while making coffee, sometimes while walking, sometimes while waiting for a meeting. I stopped looking for perfect conditions and started using the time I already had. Another big change was accepting that learning English would take time. We're living in a world where everyone wants quick results. Learn English in 30 days, become fluent in 3 months, master grammar in 1 week. It sounds exciting, but real learning doesn't work like that. Think about going to the gym. You don't build muscles after one workout. You don't lose weight after one healthy meal. You don't become stronger overnight. Language is exactly the same. Every day you practice, your brain changes a little. Maybe you don't notice it today or tomorrow, but after weeks and months, you suddenly realize, wait a minute, I understand this video. I didn't translate that sentence. I answered without thinking. Those small moments became my biggest motivation, not because someone told me I was improving, but because I could feel it. One conversation at a time, one sentence at a time, one day at a time. There was another important lesson I learned. I stopped chasing perfection and started chasing progress. Some days my pronunciation was good, some days it wasn't. Some days I remembered every word, some days I forgot the easiest vocabulary. And that's okay, because progress is never a straight line. Some days you move forward, some days you feel stuck. But if you keep showing up, you're still moving. Looking back now, I don't think my success came from studying harder. It came from making English impossible to avoid. It was in my phone, my YouTube recommendations, my podcasts, my notes, my conversations with ChatGPT, my daily routine, my thoughts. Little by little, English stopped feeling like a foreign language. It started feeling familiar, not because I became fluent overnight, but because I invited English into my everyday life. And honestly, that was one of the best decisions I've ever made. Chapter 4. My Daily English Routine. So, what did my day actually look like? People always ask me, how many hours did you study English every day? And honestly, I don't like that question, because I wasn't trying to study English. I was trying to live with English. There's a big difference. When people hear that I've been learning English for 5 months, some of them imagine that I studied 6 or 7 hours every day. That wasn't my reality. I have a full-time career. I create content. I have responsibilities. I don't have unlimited free time, so I had to build a routine that I could actually follow. Not for 1 week, but for months. My goal wasn't to have the perfect routine. My goal was to have a realistic one. The first thing I did every morning was listen, not study, just listen. Sometimes it was a podcast, sometimes it was a YouTube video, sometimes it was an interview. I didn't worry about understanding every single word. That used to be one of my biggest mistakes. Whenever I heard a word I didn't know, I stopped the video, opened the dictionary, wrote it down, repeated it, and after 5 minutes, I had forgotten what the video was even about. Now I do the opposite. I focus on the message, not every word, because that's how we listen in our native language too. We don't analyze every sentence. We simply understand the idea. That one change reduced so much pressure. After listening, I usually spent a few minutes repeating sentences out loud. This technique is called shadowing. If you've never tried it, I highly recommend it. I would pause the video, repeat exactly what the speaker said, try to copy the rhythm, the pronunciation, the pauses, not because I wanted to sound exactly like them, but because I wanted my mouth to get used to speaking English naturally. At first, it felt strange. Sometimes I sounded funny. Sometimes I couldn't repeat the sentence at all. But after a few weeks, something changed. Speaking became easier. Not perfect, just easier. And that's all I wanted. Later in the day, whenever I had some free time, I read something in English. Not textbooks, not grammar books. I read things that actually interested me. Articles about design, technology, artificial intelligence, personal development. Because if the topic is interesting, you'll naturally spend more time reading, and that's much better than forcing yourself to read something boring. Whenever I found a useful phrase, I didn't memorize it. I asked myself one question. When could I use this sentence in my own life? If I couldn't imagine using it, I moved on. I wanted to learn English that was useful for me, not English that looked impressive in a notebook. One of the biggest habits that changed everything was talking to myself. I know, it sounds a little weird, but trust me, it works. Sometimes while making coffee, I'd say, I'm making coffee because I have a long day ahead. While driving, I'd describe what I could see. While working, I'd explain my design decisions in English. No audience, no pressure, no fear of making mistakes, just me. Practicing. Another thing I started doing was using English with AI. Sometimes I'd open ChatGPT and say, let's have a conversation. Or I'd ask it to correct my mistakes, or explain a phrase I didn't understand. What I loved about practicing with AI was that I never felt embarrassed. It was patient, available anytime, and I could practice as much as I wanted. That helped me build confidence before speaking with real people. At night, I usually watched YouTube, but I changed one important thing. I stopped watching videos just because they were about learning English. Instead, I watched videos I genuinely enjoyed, in English. Design, business, technology, travel, photography, content creation. Because when you're interested, you stop thinking about studying. You're simply enjoying the content, and without realizing it, you're learning. Sometimes, I also recorded myself speaking. I picked a simple topic, maybe my day, maybe a book I had read, maybe a lesson I learned. Then I'd listen to the recording, not to criticize myself, but to notice small improvements. Did I hesitate less? Did I pronounce that word better? Did I speak a little longer? Those tiny improvements kept me motivated. If there's one thing I want you to remember from my routine, it's this. I didn't do one amazing thing. I did many small things. Every single day. That's the secret. Small actions, repeated consistently. For a long time, people often ask me, what's the best app for learning English? But I think they're asking the wrong question. The better question is, what's the best habit? Because apps don't change your life. Habits do. And if you can build the habit, the tools become much less important. Looking back, I don't think my routine was perfect. In fact, sometimes I missed a day. Sometimes I was tired. Sometimes I didn't feel like practicing. But I always came back the next day. I never let one bad day become one bad week. That made all the difference. Chapter 5. The biggest mistakes I made. If I'm being honest, I didn't improve because I did everything right. I improved because I made a lot of mistakes, and I finally learned from them. Sometimes we think successful people have secret methods, but in reality, most of them just stopped repeating the same mistakes. So, let me share the biggest mistakes I made. Maybe they'll save you months, or even years. The first mistake was waiting until I felt ready. For a long time, I believed there would be a day when I would suddenly feel confident enough to speak English. I thought confidence came first, then speaking. But I was completely wrong. Confidence comes after speaking, not before it. Every conversation, every mistake, every sentence you struggle to say builds confidence little by little. If you keep waiting, you'll keep waiting forever. The second mistake was translating everything in my head. I used to hear an English sentence, translate it into Arabic, think of my answer in Arabic, translate it back into English, and then finally speak. By the time I answered, the conversation had already moved on. It was exhausting. I realized I had to stop treating English like a math equation. Instead, I started learning complete phrases, not just individual words. For example, instead of learning the word opportunity by itself, I learned phrases like, this is a great opportunity. I'm looking for new opportunities. Slowly, my brain stopped translating every single word. It started recognizing ideas. That made speaking much more natural. The third mistake was trying to remember every new word. Whenever I found a new vocabulary word, I wrote it down, I highlighted it, I reviewed it, I created flashcards. And honestly, most of those words disappeared from my memory anyway. Now, if a word is important, I'll meet it again, and again, and again. Real learning happens through repetition in real situations, not through forcing yourself to memorize endless lists. The fourth mistake was being embarrassed by my pronunciation. I used to replay my recordings and think, that sounds terrible. But then I asked myself a simple question. How did I learn Arabic? Did I pronounce every word perfectly as a child? Of course not. Nobody expected perfection from me then. So why was I expecting perfection from myself now? From that day, I gave myself permission to sound like a learner, because that's exactly what I was. A learner. And there's nothing wrong with that. The fifth mistake was comparing my Chapter 1 to someone else's Chapter 20. I watched creators who spoke beautiful English. They sounded relaxed, natural, confident. I forgot that many of them had been practicing for years. I only saw the result. I didn't see the journey. Now, whenever I admire someone's English, I don't feel jealous. I feel inspired, because if they learned it, that means it's possible. The sixth mistake was thinking grammar was the most important thing. Grammar matters. Of course it does, but communication matters more. If your grammar is perfect, but you're too afraid to speak, Your grammar isn't helping you. I'd rather speak imperfect English than perfect silence, because communication is the goal, not perfection. The seventh mistake was believing that motivation would always be there. It wasn't. Some mornings, I didn't feel like listening. Some evenings, I didn't want to practice. But I learned something valuable. Discipline will take you much further than motivation ever will. Motivation is a feeling. Habits are a system, and systems win. The eighth mistake was trying to improve too many skills at once. Speaking, listening, grammar, writing, vocabulary, pronunciation, everything. I overwhelmed myself. Later, I started focusing on one thing at a time. 1 week, I paid more attention to listening. Another week, I focused on speaking. That made my progress feel much more manageable. The ninth mistake was expecting fast results. After 2 weeks, I wanted to sound fluent. After 1 month, I wanted to understand every podcast. After 2 months, I wanted to stop making mistakes. Looking back, those expectations were unfair. Learning a language isn't a race. It's a long conversation with yourself. The more patient you become, the faster you actually improve. And finally, the biggest mistake of all was believing that I wasn't good enough. That belief stopped me for years. Not my English, my belief. Once I changed that, everything else became easier. Because here's the truth. Your English doesn't have to be perfect to change your life. It only has to be good enough to open the next door, and then the next one, and the next one. Looking back now, I'm actually grateful for every mistake I made, because every mistake taught me something. Every awkward conversation made me stronger. Every forgotten word reminded me to keep practicing. Every moment of doubt pushed me to become more consistent. So if you're making mistakes today, congratulations. It means you're doing something that matters. It means you're learning. And that's something to be proud of. Chapter 6. What changed after 5 months? After 5 months, people started asking me a different question. Not, how are you learning English? But, your English sounds much better now. What changed? At first, I thought the answer was simple. I learned more words. I practiced speaking. I listened every day. But when I really thought about it, I realized something. The biggest change wasn't my English. The biggest change was me. English became much more than a language. It became proof that I could learn something difficult if I stayed consistent. Before this journey, whenever I saw someone speaking English confidently, I used to think, maybe they're just talented. Now, I don't think that anymore, because I've seen what happens when you show up every day. Not every day is exciting. Not every day feels productive. In fact, most days feel ordinary. You listen, you read, you speak a little, then you go to sleep. Nothing special. But when you repeat those ordinary days, again and again and again, one day, you wake up and realize you're not the same person anymore. One of the first things I noticed was that I stopped translating everything. I still translate sometimes. I'm still learning. But now, many sentences come naturally. I hear English, and I understand the idea without stopping to think in Arabic first. That moment felt incredible, not because I became fluent, but because I finally experienced what people mean when they say, think in English. Another thing that changed was my confidence, not only when speaking English, but in life. Because every time I did something that scared me, like recording a video, or speaking even when I wasn't sure, I proved to myself that fear doesn't have to stop me. I used to believe confidence creates action. Now I know. Action creates confidence. That lesson changed much more than my English. It changed the way I approach challenges. I also noticed something interesting at work. As a graphic designer, most of the best resources are in English. The best articles, the newest AI tools, the latest design trends, the most creative communities. Before, sometimes I avoided them because they felt difficult. Now, I enjoy exploring them. I don't feel locked out anymore. Another dream started becoming real: creating content in English. I'll be honest, publishing my first English video was terrifying. I kept thinking, what if people don't understand me? What if my pronunciation isn't good enough? What if nobody watches? What if people make fun of my mistakes? Those thoughts stayed in my head for days, but eventually, I remembered the promise I made to myself: progress over perfection. So I uploaded the video. Was it perfect? No. Did I make mistakes? Absolutely. Would I make that same video differently today? Probably. But I'm still proud of it, because it represents something much bigger than a YouTube video. It represents courage. It represents growth. It represents finally stopping the excuses, and that's something no number of views can measure. Another thing that surprised me was how much I started enjoying English. At the beginning, practicing felt like a task, something I had to do. Now, it's something I actually look forward to. I enjoy discovering new expressions. I enjoy understanding podcasts that once felt impossible. I enjoy reading books without reaching for a dictionary every 2 minutes. That feeling is hard to describe. It's like watching a blurry picture slowly become clear. Little by little, everything makes more sense. And maybe the biggest change of all is that I no longer see English as the finish line. 5 months ago, my goal was, I want to speak English. Today, my goal is different. I want to keep growing. I want to keep learning. I want to keep making videos. I want to connect with people from different countries. I want to become a better communicator, because learning a language isn't something you finish. It's something you live. If you're watching this, and you're somewhere at the beginning of your journey, maybe you're struggling. Maybe you think your progress is too slow. Maybe you're comparing yourself to people who have been practicing for years. I understand that feeling. I've been there. But please remember this: the version of me speaking to you today started exactly where you are. Confused? Afraid? Unsure? The only difference is that I didn't stop, and neither should you. Because one day, without even realizing it, you'll look back and you'll smile at how far you've come. Chapter 7. The resources that helped me the most. One of the questions I receive the most is, Mo, what app did you use? Or, what's the best course for learning English? And honestly, people are usually disappointed by my answer, because there wasn't one magical app. There wasn't one perfect course. There wasn't one secret website that changed everything. Instead, I built a small collection of resources. Each one had a different purpose, and together, they became part of my daily life. The first resource was YouTube. I think YouTube is one of the greatest learning platforms ever created, not because it teaches English, but because it teaches everything in English. At first, I watched videos made specifically for English learners, and they were helpful. But after a while, I realized something. If I only watched English lessons, I'd never learn how real people actually speak. So I started watching videos about things I genuinely loved: graphic design, artificial intelligence, productivity, business, storytelling, content creation. When you're interested in the topic, you forget you're learning a language. You're simply enjoying the content. And that's exactly what happened to me. The second resource was podcasts. I love podcasts because they taught me something that textbooks never could. How English actually sounds. Real conversations, real pauses, real emotions. Sometimes I understood 80%, sometimes only 50%, and that used to bother me. But eventually, I stopped measuring my progress by how many words I understood. Instead, I asked myself one question. Did I understand the main idea? Most of the time, the answer was yes, and that's enough. The third resource was reading. Not difficult books, not classic literature, just simple articles about topics I already enjoyed. I discovered something interesting. When I read about graphic design in English, I wasn't just learning the language, I was improving my design skills too. It felt like learning two things at the same time. That made reading much more exciting. The fourth resource might surprise you. It was talking to myself. No expensive software, no teacher, just me. Speaking. Sometimes I described what I was doing. Sometimes I explained an idea. Sometimes I imagined I was recording a YouTube video. Those little conversations trained my brain to think faster. And because nobody was listening, I wasn't afraid of making mistakes. The fifth resource was ChatGPT. Honestly, this became one of my favorite learning partners. Whenever I didn't understand a phrase, I asked. Whenever I wanted to practice a conversation, I asked. Whenever I needed feedback, I asked. What I really liked was that I could practice without feeling embarrassed. I could make mistakes, ask simple questions, repeat the same topic if I needed to. There was no pressure, only practice. Another thing I started doing was asking ChatGPT to play different roles. Sometimes it was a job interviewer. Sometimes it was a friend. Sometimes it was a customer. That made my practice much more realistic. Instead of memorizing answers, I started having conversations, and conversations are what actually build fluency. The last resource was my own YouTube channel. Believe it or not, creating videos became part of my learning process. Every script forced me to organize my thoughts. Every recording forced me to speak clearly. Every edit helped me notice my mistakes. In a way, my audience became part of my English journey, and that's something I'm incredibly grateful for. Looking back, I don't think any of these resources are magical. If you download the same apps, watch the same videos, read the same books, but never practice, nothing will change. The resource isn't the secret. You are. Because the best resource in the world is useless. Without consistency, sometimes people spend weeks searching for the perfect app, the perfect teacher, the perfect course, when they could have spent those weeks actually practicing English. So if you're asking me, what should I use? My answer is simple. Use whatever helps you stay consistent, because the best resource is the one that makes you come back tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. That's the resource that changes your life. Chapter 8. If I could start again, from zero. Sometimes, I like to imagine something. What if I could go back in time, to the very first day of my English journey? What if I could sit next to the version of me who was scared, confused, and constantly overthinking everything? What would I say? Honestly, I wouldn't give myself a list of grammar rules. I wouldn't recommend the newest app. I wouldn't even tell myself to study harder. I'd simply share a few lessons that took me months to learn. The first thing I'd say is, stop waiting. You're never going to feel completely ready. There will always be another course, another book, another excuse. If you wait until you feel confident, you'll never begin. Start before you're ready, because that's how confidence is built. The second thing I'd say is, Don't try to sound perfect. Try to communicate. For a long time, I believed that every sentence had to be grammatically perfect. I thought people would judge every mistake. But here's what I discovered. Most people don't care about your mistakes. They care about understanding you. Communication is more important than perfection. Every single time. The third lesson would be about vocabulary. I spent so much time memorizing isolated words. Today, I'd do the opposite. I'd learn complete sentences, complete expressions, because that's how people actually speak. Nobody builds a conversation one word at a time. We think in ideas, not in vocabulary lists. The fourth thing I'd tell myself is to enjoy the process. At the beginning, I treated English like an exam. Every mistake felt like failure. Every forgotten word felt like proof that I wasn't improving. Now I see it differently. Learning a language is like planting a tree. You don't dig it up every week to check if it's growing. You water it, you take care of it, and you trust the process. Eventually, it grows. The fifth lesson would be to stop comparing myself to other people. Social media can be inspiring, but it can also be discouraging. You see someone speaking beautiful English, and suddenly, your own progress feels invisible. But remember, you're only seeing one moment of their journey. You're not seeing the years of practice behind it. Instead of asking, why am I not there yet? Ask, am I better than I was last month? That's the comparison that actually matters. Another thing I'd tell myself is to use English for something meaningful. Don't learn English just to pass a test. Learn it to build your future, to travel, to make friends, to watch content without subtitles, to grow your career, to create opportunities. When English becomes connected to your dreams, practicing no longer feels like homework. It feels like an investment. I'd also remind myself that slow progress is still progress. There were weeks when I felt like nothing was changing. I kept practicing, but I couldn't see the results. Looking back now, those invisible weeks were probably the most important, because even when I couldn't see improvement, my brain was still learning. Growth often happens quietly. You notice it only when you look back. And finally, I'd tell myself something I wish I had believed years ago. Your accent doesn't define your intelligence. Your mistakes don't define your future. Your current level doesn't define your potential. The only thing that truly matters is whether you keep going, because the version of you 6 months from now will be created by the choices you make today, not tomorrow, not next Monday, today. So if you're watching this and you're just getting started, please don't underestimate what one day of practice can become. One day becomes a week becomes a month becomes 5 months. And one day, you'll realize you're speaking English without even thinking about how impossible it once felt. If I could go back, those are the words I'd whisper to myself. And maybe they're exactly the words you needed to hear today. Chapter 9. Final thoughts. As I reach the end of this video, I keep thinking about something. 5 months. When I first started, 5 months sounded like a very long time. I remember thinking, will I really stay consistent for that long? Will I actually improve? What if nothing changes? Today, 5 months feel like they passed in the blink of an eye. And the funny thing is, I'm still learning. I still make grammar mistakes. I still forget words. Sometimes, I still have to stop and think before I speak. But none of those things bother me anymore, because I finally understand what learning a language really looks like. It doesn't happen in one big moment. There's no morning where you suddenly wake up and you're fluent. Instead, it happens in thousands of tiny moments. the first time you understand a joke in English, the first time you finish a YouTube video without subtitles, the first time you answer a question without translating, the first time you think in English without realizing it. Those moments seem small, but together, they change your life. If there's one thing I hope you take away from my story, it's this. You don't have to be special to learn English. You don't need a perfect memory. You don't need to study all day. You don't need to live in an English-speaking country. You don't need to be fearless. You just need to keep showing up. Again, and again, and again. Because consistency is much more powerful than motivation. Motivation made me start. Consistency kept me going. And if you're watching this right now, maybe you're at the beginning of your own journey. Maybe you're feeling frustrated. Maybe you've already tried before. Maybe you think it's too late. Let me tell you something. 5 months ago, I was sitting exactly where you are now, wondering if I could really do it, wondering if I would ever feel confident enough to speak, wondering if all this effort would be worth it. Now I know the answer. Yes, it is worth it. Not only because my English improved, but because I proved something to myself. I proved that I could change. And once you prove that to yourself, you start believing that other changes are possible too. That's why this journey means so much to me. It was never only about English. It was about becoming the kind of person who keeps going even when progress feels slow, who chooses consistency over excuses, who accepts mistakes instead of fearing them. And honestly, I think that's a lesson that applies to almost everything in life. Before I finish, I want to ask you one simple question. Where do you want to be 5 months from today? Imagine the future version of yourself. Maybe speaking English with confidence. Maybe watching movies without subtitles. Maybe getting a better job. Maybe traveling. Maybe making your own YouTube videos. Whatever your dream is, don't focus on the destination. Focus on today's practice, because today's practice creates tomorrow's confidence, and tomorrow's confidence creates a completely different future. Thank you for spending this time with me. It really means a lot. If my story helped you or gave you hope, I'd love for you to stay with me on this journey. Every week, I'll share everything I'm learning, the lessons, the mistakes, the habits, and together, we'll continue improving our English, one conversation at a time. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to Mama English with Mo. And if you're already learning English, leave a comment below. Tell me where you're from, how long you've been learning, and what's the biggest challenge you're facing right now. I read every comment, and who knows, maybe your story will inspire someone else to keep going. Thank you again. Take care of yourself. Keep practicing. And I'll see you in the next video.